saddle, he wore a shining star. His job to offer battle to bad men near and far. He conquered fear and he conquered hate. He turned dark night into day. He made his blazing saddle a torch to light the way.
Hello and welcome to Staff Picks, the podcast for movie nerds by movie nerds. As always, this is Mario Lanza, and I am your host on our journey through the movies out there that just need a little more love. Our movie today is a little different in that I would have a hard time arguing this is a movie that's unknown or underloved or underrated, but the good news is I've kind of left this show open-ended with a format that I can talk about pretty much any movie I want just if I think it will make an interesting show, and that's this one today. Our movie today, the 1974 Mel Brooks comedy Blazing Saddles, commonly known as one of the most beloved / controversial comedies of all time, and we will be sure to get into that. But it's just one, there's so many interesting things going on in this movie, and there's so many things to talk about and topics and arguments and just cultural things and just concepts of comedy that I just really wanted to delve into this one. And I have a fascinating story how we got here in the first place with my guest. My guest today is he's a pretty well-known guy. He used to play in the NFL, big name personal injury lawyer down in Tampa. He was on the TV show Survivor. He's in the news all the time in the Tampa area from what I hear. Just very excited to have someone with this name recognition on the show. Welcome to the show, Mr. Brad Culpepper.
Mario, my man, I'm so happy to be here.
Now, Brad, you were one of my very top gets for this show. I'm so excited that you agreed to do this. Although, before we get into the story of how you and I met and how we ended up on this podcast, why don't you tell people out there maybe who you are, what you do?
Oh, okay. Well, if I'm one of your highest rated, well, then good luck with your podcast. I'm teasing. Let's see. I'm Brad Culpepper, and I'm a lawyer here in town. And fortunately for all you guys who come to Tampa, you get to see me on the billboard. So you're welcome for all that. I'm very sarcastic, and that's why this is a very good movie for me to be breaking down. So half the things I'm saying are half truths. So take that as you want. But anyway, yeah, I've done Survivor a couple times. My wife has done Survivor a couple times, Monica. We usually run into people at the mall, in the airports. Although since I've done it a second time, people give me a little bit of love. But before it used to be a lot of, hey, remember you guys on Survivor? I hated you, but I love Monica. So that was kind of my claim to fame for a little while. I redeemed a little bit the next time I played. But so I'm a lawyer here, but I tell you what I really am right now is a father of 3 kids. I got one son, Rex, who just beat cancer, and he had testicular cancer, and he's back at Syracuse, cancer-free, got melted away with chemo. Got another son, Judge, who's a defensive lineman at Penn State, and he's just started this fall up there. And then I've got my daughter, Honor, who is a rising junior in high school, and she's getting recruited by not Power 5 Division I schools, but Division I schools nonetheless in basketball. So I hang my hat on those attributes more so than my NFL and my lawyer and my Survivor stuff.
Yeah, and you're a movie fan as well, correct?
For sure. Quite frankly, when I started, we rent a lot more movies than we actually go to. Before we had kids, we used to go to movies all the time. But this one is near and dear to my heart. It's so I don't want to say pivotal. I mean, it's just a comedy, but all my kids have seen this movie. They've seen almost all the Mel Brooks movies, but they can quote, of course they some have to bleep themselves out sometimes, but they can quote almost every line from Blazing Saddles. So if you question my fatherhood, I mean, there it speaks for itself. All my kids can quote Blazing Saddles, pretty much wrote from beginning to end. See, that shows how good a dad I am.
Yeah, that explain. I mean, that kind of backs up the story of how we ended up together. I'll just let people know as a lot of people know, I write about Survivor, and I have a website called thefunny115.com, and one of the articles I'm most known for, at least recently, is I did a defense of Brad, where he was on the show a couple years ago, and he got really I would say, unfair story edit where it kind of painted him in a bad picture. And so I wrote this thing defending him, pointing out why he wasn't really a bad guy and how this edit just screwed him. And so somehow, lo and behold, you found out about this article and you contacted me about it.
I did, and I appreciated it. What you said, and what you said was quite truthful.
Now that's not the half of what you're saying being half true, right? That's the truth, right there.
That's the truth. That's the truth. As far as you know.
Yeah. Well, if half of what you say is half truth, then you're only telling 1/4 of the truth. I just figured that out.
Maybe that, or maybe I'm telling the whole truth. You got to really break down that math. It's difficult. I'd make a good a citizen from Rockridge. Not make much sense.
Okay, but what happened is, so Brad heard about this article and contacted me and said, hey, if you're ever in Tampa, come out and I'd love to have lunch with you and we'll talk about it. And just in a fortuitous turn of events, I happened to start a new job in Tampa, like literally a month after that, which I'd never been to Florida in my life. And it was just this funny turn of events. I ended up meeting Brad for lunch. And what I wanted to mention is that we sat there and we were going to talk about Survivor and life and just, him being a media figure. But we got distracted because we spent at least an hour of our lunch talking about Mel Brooks movies.
Well, I mean, and that was a fantastic lunch. If I could go to lunch and talk about Mel Brooks movies, I'd go to lunch a lot more often with people.
Well, yeah, it's because this podcast at the time was just kind of an idea in the back of my head. I wanted to get people on and talk about movies they love, and I really hadn't planned for it or how I was going to do it. But the minute Brad and I were talking about Blazing Saddles and History of the World, and he has a very similar background that I do, just with comedy movies and just knowing the history of comedy movies, that's how it all came about. And I said, hey, do you want to be on my show? And he's like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And so that's really how Staff Pick started, because Brad agreed to be on my show. And I'm like, well, I should do this show now. That should be fun. I already got a verbal commit.
Well, good deal. I'm glad I was instrumental in starting your show. It's a good idea. Listen, there are a lot of movies, kids these days, I guess with Netflix and everything else, maybe they check out some old movies. But, I mean, this is one, I take pride, and I'm being serious now, when my kids were growing up, I would make sure they knew who Led Zeppelin was, and they knew who Jimi Hendrix was, and they knew the Beatles, and so they know all of that. The Who, and during Little League practice, I would always make sure that, a historical rock and roll group was on, so they would not just know, I don't know, all those crazy named people now. Not that I'm against it, and I'm not one of those old fuddy-duddies, but you need to understand where it all came from. It's the same way with movies, and it's the same way with comedies and everything else. There are plenty of fantastic comedies out now. I mean, anything where Will Ferrell's in, or he's such a funny guy, and Sacha Baron Cohen, and there's some really funny things out there. But they needed to understand from an early age, I don't know, history of comedians, and I think Mel Brooks is I don't know if he's a face on Rushmore on comedy, but he could be. There's an argument that he could be, and the humor is a little bit dry, a little bit, you're not going to really catch it, or it's not going to hit you funny until after you've turned the show off. But I don't know. It's hard to explain. You either get Mel Brooks or you do not, and if you do not, it's hard to make somebody get him.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. I was very insistent from my kids being an early age that they watch comedy movies in particular. I always am trying to get them to understand fundamentals of comedy, how comedy works. And I didn't do the music thing as much as you do, but my wife does that. My wife is the music person. And is Monica involved? Does she have any input into the kids' pop culture upbringing?
Probably, yeah. You know what? I should say musically, she's a 70s girl, so she knows every single 70s song by heart. So their knowledge of that comes from her. It's funny, Monica in college before we met would not have been a Mel Brooks fan, and now we've been married 26 years, and sure, her comedy tastes have definitely moved in my direction. She was a bit more literal back then, and then still probably more literal than me now, not quite as sarcastic, but she gets me, and it tickles me when she gets me sometimes saying something that's real sarcastic with a straight face, and I'm like, my young Padawans come along. She's much more into Mel Brooks type humor and my type dry humor than she ever would have been had we never met.
So you juvenilized her. You lowered her standards of comedy.
I have. But you know what? It helps her understand her kids. It's funny. So my daughter is beautiful, looks like my wife. However, her mindset is me. Matter of fact, she would be unbelievable on Survivor. If she went out there, she would be so manipulative and so, she'd smile and, unlike me, I got to do it with all my mouth. My looks aren't going to get me that far, but she could do it. And she's a killer, but she is super sarcastic. And matter of fact, I think she likes the Mel Brooks movies. She's 16 as much or more than my guys. Although I shouldn't say it. They love them too, but she's, this is her straight up. And I think it's not the typical teenage girl attitude. And she's kind of got that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And my daughter is the same way. My daughter has a really wicked sense of humor, and she loves stuff like The Office and Mystery Science Theater and just really that off-kilter comedy. And I've always tell her, because she never knew anybody like her in high school. She's like, none of my friends like this stuff. And I'm like, just go to college. In college, you'll meet all the weird, smart people that know all this comedy. And she was shocked when she got to college, and she knew nobody there that likes this stuff either. So apparently I lied to her.
No, it's so funny you say that. My daughter was coming back from a basketball trip with Monica, and she got her picture taken in Tampa Airport, and she sent it. We have a group text with Rex Judge and Monica and I, and she got a picture taken with Packer from The Office.
Todd Packer.
Yeah. And so she goes, look who I'm with, Packer. And I was thinking, oh my God, there are not many 16-year-old girls that would get a selfie with him. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I think Packer legally is required to stay away from most 16-year-old girls.
I think if he's Packer, he would be.
But yeah, the sentence that Brad won me over, this is near and dear to my heart, this sentence that Brad said when we were at lunch. He's like, my kids know all the words to the Inquisition song from Mel Brooks' History of the World. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because that's like one of my all-time favorite movies, and that was the original idea for this podcast, although I'm going to tell people this is really a two-part podcast. Brad he wanted to come on and talk about Blazing Saddles and History of the World, and this is just the Blazing Saddles one, but like, he's actually teaching his kids the Inquisition song, which is such an odd thing for a dad in 2018 to be teaching his kids. But that's the same thing.
Wait. I didn't teach them. They learned it themselves. They're all smarter. I mean, they have photographic memory, so they have to watch it once. I have to watch it like 30 times to be able to send in the Jews. But they watch it once and they've already got it. So while I did expose them to it, I didn't make them memorize it. However, they did. And it's really funny, and they every time it'll be on TBS or sometimes, whoa, Dad, let's sing it, and I'm like, or they can sing Madeline Kahn's I'm So Tired. They know all the words of that one too from Blazing Saddles.
Mel Brooks once said that's the dirtiest song he ever wrote, so I'm not sure that's one I want my kids singing.
Oh, it's but they'll be doing something athletically or something. They're so I'm so tired, and I'm like, oh my God, don't do it.
So your Father of the Year status maybe is up in doubt sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that you said that I find fascinating, and people may find this interesting, is that you told me once when you were in college, you were a big athlete and stuff, but you were always trying to look for someone like your teammates to go to these Mel Brooks or comedy movies with you, and you could never find anybody because athletes in general aren't always the biggest comedy fans. That's true, right?
Well, they may be, but they're more, I mean, I'm being stereotypical now. And so a stereotypical meathead football player, it's slap your face. It's got to be in your face kind of funny. Everybody liked Eddie Murphy and there's nothing wrong. I mean, he's a legend and everything else, but those guys weren't as kind of off kilter. And I would say that's, for the most part. Now, I had a couple friends that are, in fact, my very best friend is a guy named Kirkpatrick, All-American in Florida, and he's a huge Mel Brooks fan, and he and I were right. Maybe that's why we were best friends in college. But we were few and far between. For the most part, it was more, and not that I don't like the Three Stooges, but it had to be more Three Stooge type. And Mel Brooks is that way, but he's that way in a different way. It's kind of hard to explain. But most athletes are pretty black and white when it comes to music and it comes to basic things, and they're not really wanting to go to some kind of bizarre art fest type gig. And matter of fact, like this weekend, there's they've got all kinds of deals coming to Tampa and Comic-Con and all, and I'll head to those things. Not that I'm huge into anime or anything like that, but it's a different walk of life, and I can appreciate that. And I don't know, life's too short not to kind of smell the roses and see all kinds of gigs.
You're usually too busy antiquing, correct?
I'll do that too. That's now my wife and I do that together. That's definitely for fun for both of us.
Okay, I will. One thing I wanted to say before we delve into Blazing Saddles, particularly, is that I've done a lot of comedy writing, obviously, and most people know me as a writer, and anyone who knows me on Staff Picks kind of knows my history, that I just obsess over comedy movies and the history of comedy movies and stuff. But Blazing Saddles is kind of an interesting one in particular, and why I think it deserves its own show. Just because I think I was just reading a description of comedy the other day that said there's something really interesting when you find a comedian that's really willing to be dangerous. They'll go right up to that line of danger and they'll skate all over it, like just on the side of good taste, bad taste, but never quite crossing the line where they turn the audience off. And that's the one thing that I see, especially in these early Mel Brooks movies, that how willing he was to go to that line of danger and just dance around it gleefully. And that's not something you would see in a lot of movies today. Like he himself has said, there's no way this movie comes anywhere near a theater nowadays.
Yeah, no, especially not with political correctness the way it is. And actually, but what people don't fail to understand, and if you watch this movie on a superficial in a superficial way, you're not going to understand that, yeah, there's crass language, and yes, there's themes that maybe aren't going to work today, but it's a lot deeper than that. In fact, it's a parody and making fun of how people, of how superficial, dumb certain things are. It gets a lot deeper and gets, more comedic. When a guy like Richard Pryor, who co-wrote Blazing Saddles, I don't know if many people know that, but I mean, he was on the edge of comedy his whole career. But that's why, this movie is written by a Jewish guy and a black guy. And so it's both anti-Semitic and obviously there's harsh language racially in it as well. However, it was written by those guys, and that explains a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was going to say Mel Brooks specifically said, I have a quote from him here. He said, I really wanted to just go out there and make a mockery of racism, intolerance, and Bible beaters. He goes, I just hated seeing those people. I hated the attitudes, and he just wanted to skewer them as hard as possible. And he specifically, this was a 5-person writing team, and he went and told them, he says, here's the general plot of this movie, just write it. And he said, do not make it a polite movie. Make this not polite at all. And so, like, that's the thing, like, it comes from such a good place, and, like, he's trying to make a good point, and he really does. I'd argue this is a very successful movie at what it's trying to do, but it would be taken so literal now if they showed it on TV that they just couldn't do it, and I don't know what that says about us, that we've come to a point where we just can't even joke about this stuff anymore, where he was joking and Richard Pryor was joking to make a good point.
Well, I kind of like it, and I don't want to get political on this thing, but I mean, it's kind of appropriate right now, because sometimes I feel that, I don't know, some people that go to certain rallies are the people like at Rock Ridge, and are the conservative way right. And there's a lot of hypocrisy and ignorance in regards to certain political things these days. And this movie is definitely taking a jab at, I don't know, ignorance. And it's just, again, I don't want to get political on it, but I'm very left. So maybe I'm skewed against the right, but to me, that's what this movie's all about. It's kind of saying, okay, look at the sheep, look how dumb some people are, that think they are more than they are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't even know if it has to be political. I'm fairly right, and I 100% agree with you on this one. Like, I just love this movie. I love everything about it. I love how dangerous it is. I love how provocative it is. I just love how clever it is. And actually, there's a great quote here, too, because I know, obviously most people have seen Blazing Saddles, and so they know how many N-words are in this movie, how much racial humor is in there. I mean, it's just all over the place. And there's a quote here where people always say online, well, Blazing Saddles hasn't aged well, or it wouldn't be made today, or it's dated. And there's a great quote I read here. I want to get your opinion on this, Brad. Some guy said, Oh no, Blazing Saddles has aged perfectly. It is our age that is tainted. This type of comedy with no barriers and no taboos was as close to full integration and equality as we will ever get. Our generation today is too soft and infantile for the likes of Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor.
Well, I can't disagree with that response. It's funny. It reminds me of a Charles Barkley quote when he talks about, he said something like the locker room is the most insensitive, racial, homophobic, and I don't want to say anti-woman, but misogynistic place he's ever been. And he goes, boy, I miss the locker room. Because you're really, I don't know, humor can go in so many different ways that when you're going out on a football field and you're sweating, blood, sweat, and tears with your teammates, and you're putting it on the line and you trust them, and it's probably like the military would be a locker room too. But it's like being able to have fun and tease about stereotypes and stuff like that. You got to have thick skin. You got to be able to take it, and you can't take it for more than what it is, and understand it's probably the intent behind everything. And the intent of the humor is to make fun of things like that, and make fun of people who take things so serious, and to make fun of people that would really say the things that they say in this movie and mean it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, are you serious? I mean, they say it in this movie to make it, they say the N-word in this movie to show how stupid it is to really use it. But unfortunately, there are people that really use it and really mean it. I mean, when the old lady walks by him and she's mad, she's up yours. And then later on, he saves the town from Mongo, and she bakes a pie for him for apologizing for the up yours. And there was a buddy of mine on the Buccaneers, a guy named Kenny Gant, black guy from Florida, won a couple Super Bowls with Dallas Cowboys. And I had Blazing Saddles on in a camp, in a preseason camp, and Kenny walked by and he stopped by and he goes, "Is that Blazing Saddles?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was a little bit like, "Oh my gosh." Kenny goes, "That's my most favorite movie in the entire world." He sat in and we watched it 2 more times and we had a blast. He laughed every single time something like that happened. And I love Kenny to this day just because he gets it.
Yeah, I remember specifically a thread on Reddit just a couple months ago where I was researching for this movie, and someone who's like maybe 17, 18 years old saw Blazing Saddles, and they're like, "I thought it was funny, but I thought it was really insensitive racially." And he goes like, "Oh, I wonder what black people think of this movie. Are people offended by this movie?" And it was funny. It was just, all these black people that had grown up with this movie, one after another, all responding and saying, "I love that movie. That is the funniest movie." And it's like one of the few movies that kind of handled racial humor the way that it really would have been in the 70s. Like it had some realness to it. And I found another quote where Richard Pryor, the same thing, where, Mel Brooks had written this script. And like you said, Richard Pryor was a contributor to the script, and he was like a consultant. And they brought him in. They said, like, "What do you think of this movie?" And Richard said, "I like it. It's real." And that's the word he used. It's real. This is how people talk. And Mel Brooks is like, "Should I use all these racial slurs in the movie? Do you have a problem with that? Like, is that too far?" And Richard's like, "No, that's not too far, because that's how the bad guys would talk. So don't water it down. Don't tone it down. This is the way the bad guys talk. They're the idiots in the movie." Like, you're making a point. So yes. That's exactly that Richard Pryor backs up that point. I love it because you're speaking the way these bad guys would talk.
No, and the heroes of the movie are not the townspeople, and not, the idiots are the ones who are using all the derogatory statements. You got Slim Pickens, who's, the big idiot. You got Harvey Korman. What's the guy's name? Lyle.
Burton Gilliam. Yeah. The actor's Burton Gilliam.
So all those guys are using all the language, and then the townspeople, and they're all the idiots of the show. They're all the foils of the 2 heroes, which are Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder. Mm-hmm. And those guys never do use any kind of poor language, and they're the heroes of the show. They're the smartest ones there, so it makes the ones that are using the foul language and the racially insensitive stuff, they're the foils. They're the dummies of the show, and that's in a sense why it all makes sense, because the smart ones are the ones that are not as stupid as the ones who were using all the language.
Well, yeah, and then what's even more interesting as I was reading about this one is that, hidden behind all these, racial jokes and racial politics and this offensive humor is the fact that, Mel Brooks put out a huge blockbuster movie with a black lead as the hero, which was very odd for that time. And so people don't really notice, like, he was kind of breaking down barriers by doing stuff that you weren't allowed to do in a movie at that time. So I think it's very shallow just to focus on just all these, N-words and racial language when there's a bigger picture here with this movie in particular.
No, it was, well, but they play into stereotypes. Cleavon Little or Bart, I mean, he's got all the style with his Gucci bags and his Gucci outfit, and he runs into Count Basie in the desert. I mean, who would think about that? I mean, I can sit around the room and say, all right, let's do this. All right, so Bart's going to be coming into town, and before he hits town, he's going to be playing the music, right? So he's riding his horse, and there's music, and he's out west, and, kind of like a John Ford type, Searchers type area, and all of a sudden he's going to come up, and the music is actually Count Basie and his band playing the music in the desert, and he's going to give him 5 and go on. It's like, yeah, let's do that. That'll work perfect. I just put my mind in Mel Brooks and all the writers for this movie. It makes me giggle. And then it's like, all right. And then Mel, all right, you're gonna be an Indian in this one, and they're gonna go out west. They're gonna ride in a circle, and then you're gonna make a derogatory statement like, boy, he's blacker than me. It's just all those little different nuances in the show. Then of course, what's funny, and I don't know if we want to delve, we can go by plot or we can do whatever, but it's funny. So whenever I tell somebody I love, Blazing Saddles or whatever, Young Frankenstein or what have you, every time people, maybe it's more of a white thing, but every time people think of Blazing Saddles, they think of the beans scene with Mongo and the gassing it up around the campfire. It's funny. That's all everybody remembers from it. I mean, it's funny and all, but I don't know that would be my first thought of that movie.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because that ties perfectly into my story I wanted to tell. This movie came out in February '74, a little before I was born. I was born in April of '74, and you're a couple years older than me, so like you probably wouldn't have seen this in the theater, right?
No, I was born '69, so no, I was 5 years old. I didn't see it until I think it maybe came on TBS or something.
So your parents weren't as liberal with the crazy R-rated movies as you are with your kids.
Yeah, they would have let me see, but I definitely was 5 years. I would have been 4 or 5 years old. I wouldn't have seen it then, but they let me see a couple. But no, definitely not as much as. Well, I think everybody grows up. This day and age, kids are way older than we were at 15.
Yeah. What I wanted to say is that, like, I didn't grow up with this movie. I wasn't introduced to it until later. My parents were very strict, no R-rated movies in the house, and Mel Brooks is about as R-rated as you're going to get. So that they were not something we were willingly being shown. But I will say my mom was this small-town girl from a farm, Port Angeles, Washington, not exposed to a lot of super sophisticated, really high-level comedy as a kid. But she would tell me, she's like, I love stuff like Dr. Zhivago and stuff like that and Lawrence of Arabia. Those were her favorite movies. But she would always tell me the funniest thing she ever saw in a movie theater happens to be the scene that you just mentioned. And she would tell me this as a kid. There's this farting scene in Blazing Saddles. She's like, I fell out of my chair the first time I saw that, Mario. So this was this legendary scene I grew up hearing about. There's cowboys sitting around and they're eating beans like in every Western movie, but Mel Brooks decided, well, if you had coffee and beans, you'd fart a lot. So let's put that in a movie. So most people I'm sure know this scene, but my mom would just build this up in my head as the funniest thing she had ever seen in a movie. So that was my introduction to Blazing Saddles. I knew it as the farting movie.
No, for sure. And my kids, when they first saw it, they were young and they laughed and they saw that. And, I guess, kind of like Dumb and Dumber when old boy has the X-Lax in the bathroom, when they saw it, they thought it was a funny scene. And it is funny, make no mistake, but there's just a lot more to the movie than just the farting scene. And I was thinking back, and I meant to say this too, when we were talking about, the smart ones versus the dumb ones. It starts out early when, Slim Pickens and Lyle come running into where they're building the railroad, and they talk about, you're not, break time's over, you're not going to get no sun, no how. And then he says, all right, why don't you guys sing us a spiritual? And they say, sing the Camptown Ladies, and they're like, Camptown Ladies, I don't know what you're talking. And then they break into, I get no kick from champagnes, ooh, beer, alcohol. A classic song, and Slim Pickens, no, come on, Camptown Ladies. They're like, the Camptown Ladies, I don't know that. And then they start whooping around, and they're all doing that dance. Like my kids, even when the movie's not on or something, they'll start dancing like the Mel Brooks, like those cowboys in the singing Camptown Ladies with their hands in the air, and it is so funny. And again, it's the dumb ones that are doing the things that would be stereotypical done on the other side, and it's perfect.
Okay, yeah. Okay, let's get into the plot of the movie. We'll walk through this at a fairly high level here. I don't want to go into every little gag, but I just want to. I have a lot of young listeners that may not know of this movie or may have just written it off or think. Unfortunately, there's a lot of thought process out there like, oh, the movie's like before 1990. It's too old. I don't want to watch it.
Right.
But, yeah. But this one in particular is special. And I'll paint a little picture for people that Mel Brooks in 1968 wrote a movie which is clearly one of the most dangerous, ballsy comedies of all time, The Producers, which I would assume you're a fan of that one, right?
Everyone, for sure.
Yeah, so The Producers is about, Holocaust humor, which if you think Blazing Saddles is ballsy, think about that one, how soon that one came out after World War II. And then this is really his follow-up to The Producers. There's another movie in the middle, I forget what it's called, he did one in between, but this is considered his follow-up, so it's like, how do you top The Producers? Like, how do you follow that up? And he goes for this one, which is just this crazy racial, making fun of the Old West parody, and it starts right off the bat, and I would say this movie maybe has one of the funniest, probably first 20 minutes of just about any movie I've ever seen. It starts off so strong.
It's amazing. My kids they can monologue everybody's line all the way to where the handcart sinks, or till they go to Mayor or Governor Lepetamine. But yeah, it's like even with the music, it's great Western music in this movie. So as it starts, you really don't. You wouldn't differentiate it between any other Western the way it starts, but then obviously the dialogue comes in, and you got a lot of Chinese people who are building the railroad. You got the blacks and the Chinese working, and you got the typical white overseers come in, and they're laying rail, and I could monologue the whole thing, but I wouldn't want you quoting me on any of it. People could take things out of context, so you're not going to catch me with that. So, and then one of the funniest parts is when they're saying, hey, there's some quicksand down there. We're having trouble laying the rail. And he says, we'll send a couple of horses. And Slim Pickens, horses? We can't afford to lose no horses. Send a couple of, and they use the N-word. And that's when he, he picks Cleavon Little, Bart, and his buddy. And he goes, truth be known, you asked specifically for, the N-word. And he goes, my grandmother is Dutch. And then Lyle says, get. And it's just one of the fun. And then of course, they're singing Camptown Ladies as they're pushing the handcart down to the quicksand. And then the other funny line my kids love to say, we say this all the time, when something happens or, somebody loses something, and we'll always be like, dang, we just lost a $400 handcart. When the black guys, of course, are sinking too, and they're like, handcart, use the word of the handcart, not us. But so anyway, and you can take it, but anyway, it talks about, and then it goes back to the governor's mansion, and I think Cleavon Little gets out and bashes one of the guys on the head, and so he gets taken to the governor, and the governor, which is Mel Brooks, is trying to figure out. Well, I'll tell you what, you can tell it. I don't know how in depth you want to get or not. Basically, he figures out a scheme to run the rail through. He's got to run it through Rock Ridge.
Yeah, I'll do a quick overview here. I don't want to, again, there's so many good lines, I don't want to spoil it for people. I want people to experience this movie for the first time, especially that opening scene. But yeah, just for an overview, just how's this for a ballsy movie? I can't imagine anyone would go anywhere near this storyline nowadays, where literally there's this railroad, it's going to go through this little town called Rock Ridge, and all the surveyors and governors know this. They're like, well, the railroad's going through this town, and that's instant money. The minute the railroad goes through the town, all the land values go up.
Land snatch.
Land snatch, that's it, yeah.
Look, land, see snatch.
So they need to chase these people out of town. It's the old Scooby-Doo treatment. We got to scare them out so we can go in there and buy the land before all the railroad values go up. And they try to frighten the parishioners off, and it doesn't work. And so they come up with a plan is we'll send them a sheriff to protect them who's so offensive that they will either shoot him on sight or flee the town. And their criteria for someone who will horrify everyone is that he's black. So that's really the plot of the movie. We'll send them a black guy and they'll kill him. Some great performances here. We got Harvey Korman as this corrupt attorney general, Hedley Lamar, and he's the one that sees the money. You get the dollar signs in his eyes. I need that town. And there's a great understated scene as he's talking about how much he wants that land, and he's dry humping a statue as he's giving his monologue, which I don't think I caught that as a kid.
Oh yeah, that one was good. Meanwhile, the executioner's out back hanging the horse and the other guy, and then he's like, they brings out the red ball paddles and those little red devils, talking about Indians, and maybe they'll bite. I can get a harumph out of him. I mean, there's so many lines in the whole scene when he's got his little big bosomed secretary.
Well, that's straight out of The Producers. They use that same gag in The Producers too.
Yes.
With Inga.
Yes. I was thinking, my kids also say this. They're talking about the number 6 dance. What about the women? Sparing the women? No, we shit on the number 6 dance. So my kids I'll say, well, where are you going tonight? And Rex will say, we're going to a number 6 dance. And it's kind of funny when they say that.
Yeah.
Again, you have to see the movie to understand what the number 6 dance is. We'll pull a number 6 on them. This is when we come riding into town, a whomping and a stomping, everything within an inch of its life. Sparing the women? No! Anyway, I digress. Well, much like the movie digresses in the end. I mean, there's a big surprise when they break the third barrier or fourth barrier?
What is it, the fourth wall? I think that's what it's called.
Yeah,
I would argue this movie, it's really good for about half. I don't really like the second half as much. Like, I don't think it holds together as a narrative as strong as it should, which is, as other Mel Brooks movies go, I think Young Frankenstein I probably like overall more. But I think at its high points, nothing beats Blazing Saddles.
But even you got to rewatch the back parts when you got Dom DeLuise, as Buddy, who's a typically kind of gay guy, and then they break through the wall and they're in Universal Studios and come on, they hit Buddy, and it's just, I don't know, it breaks into, it's almost the best way you could finish a movie like that because it's not serious. I mean, it's totally slapstick, and it's like, you know what? Let's go ahead and finish it out with the most slapsticky way you can do it and break the fourth wall down and just have them get a huge food fight at the commissary on Universal Studios, and then they'll go back to a movie theater to see how it ends. I mean, it's almost perfect, Mario. I would argue opposite of you because there's no real way you could finish that movie the way it starts so strong in a constructive way. There's no kind of Hollywood. You can't make the ending real. You've got to make the ending absurdly unreal to make it actually work.
Yeah, I mean, I do like how crazy it gets at the end. We'll get there in a second. We'll talk about the end. But yeah, it always strikes me as a movie they couldn't figure out how to end it, so they just go, we'll make it as crazy as possible because, like you said, there really is no way you can end it.
Right. I mean, you couldn't have, obviously the good guys are going to win in the end, and they don't end up taking Rock, the Cleavon Little and Bart and the Waco Kid figure out how to keep them from capturing the city. But that's not good enough.
No, that's fair. I mean, again, I'm not Mel Brooks. Who am I to criticize Mel Brooks writing the most famous comedy of all time? In fact, do you know how big this movie was? I just read this today, that it was so big in 1974 that they released it the next year, too. It came out 2 years in a row just because the studio didn't have anything else to release in 75.
I had no idea. That's interesting.
Yeah, this is a huge hit. Again, for all these arguments, people, they wouldn't watch that today. It could not be released. I'm like, this would be a huge hit if they ever brought it back. But yeah, no one would want to sign the insurance waivers for liability.
No, it's almost like Mel Brooks when he did this movie. He's like, you know what? If it's going to be questioned or probably going to be censored, put it in there. So it's like he's like, throw the book at them. I want this to be so outrageous that, it'll pass everything because it's too outrageous to not put on the air. And it worked.
Well, here's a quote. Here's an exact quote that backs up what you said. Mel Brooks, I think, told his writers, he says, write anything you want, put it all in there, because we'll all be arrested after this movie.
I actually, it's funny. I forgot that I'd done this. Mel Brooks came to Tampa about 2 or 3 years ago, and we went. I took all 3 kids, and we sat at the Performing Arts Center, and they had an airing of Blazing Saddles, uncut and everything, and it was packed.
Mm-hmm.
Packed. I mean, and the place holds a ton of people. And then Mel Brooks came out afterwards. Now he's gotten kind of old, but he was still funny, and it was a kind of a question and answer type thing. But I mean, I think my kids, I took them to Raiders of the Lost Ark at Old Tampa Theater when it came. Well, not when it came out, but they had a re-showing, and all the kids remember that. And I swear, seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark in the theater and seeing Blazing Saddles in the theater were probably 2 highlights of their movie, seeing short lives.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, see, I always have moments like that where I see they re-release a movie and I want to take my kids to it. The ones that I've always wanted to do was Rocky and Rocky 2. I want to see those in a theater with a live audience. I just think that would just be like Goosebump Central.
It was. I saw them. I saw Jaws in the theater too. Back when it came. I was young. But I saw, and they came out close to the same time, Rocky and Jaws, and I was blown away by both of them. Wasn't able to see The Godfather in the theater, but clearly saw him afterwards at home. But just trying to think of, Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I saw both those in the theater, and those were pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, well, I just had recently a similar thing. We're kind of getting off the topic, but this is interesting. But when they re-released Titanic in theaters a couple years ago, and then they did Avatar, they give that a second showing, and I'm like, I don't know what you think of the movie itself, Avatar, the plot or anything, but like the special effects, if you could see that in the theater one time.
Yeah.
So like I made sure my kids saw Titanic and Avatar on the big screen, just so they could say one day that they did.
No, for sure. I totally get. I mean, it's much more spectacular, in an IMAX or on a big screen than it would be on small TV. That's it. And kids these days, they're just looking at everything on their phones or on a tablet. I mean, you can't appreciate that movie on any of that.
Yeah, oh, no, absolutely. It's a whole different world. All right, so let's go a little bit back here to Rock Ridge. I only wanted to do about 20 minutes on the plot of this movie because, again, I want people to experience it. But let's talk about the people of Rock Ridge for a moment, because I would say this is my particular most underrated part of Blazing Saddles, and it's the part that nobody ever talks about, all the little Rock Ridge jokes.
Well, the first Rock Ridge shows everybody's named Johnson.
Yes.
And then I agree with Arnold Johnson, or Larry Johnson, and agrees with Howard Johnson and his one ice cream scoop. Which is, and I think Howard Johnson is actually Higgins from Magnum P.I.
Oh, wow, that's Higgins. I didn't catch that.
Oh, yes, that's Higgins, for sure.
Higgins Johnson is right.
Yeah. And the old frontier gibberish. My kids will say that all the time.
Yeah, I was going to quote him. That's my favorite guy. There's for people who don't know, there's this prospector named Gabby Johnson, and he he just literally speaks in frontier gibberish. They even call it that. And what are some of the words he uses? He calls people a sidewinding crocker croaker.
I wish the kids could have heard that. It was authentic frontier gibberish.
And he's got a word whenever he's agreeing with someone. He's always like, ribbit, ribbit.
Right. Well, he's the one up in the bell tower who first notices Bart and is quite alarmed that Bart's coming and informs them all that he's near. But, of course, he's not saying he's near. He's using the N-word, and everybody thinks he's saying near. And then Higgins from Magnum P.I. Greets Cleavon Little, or Bart, with a Laurel and Hardy handshake, which is I always say that. I always say that too. Well, here's a Laurel and Hardy handshake.
I love the audacity of that joke because it's so stupid, and I love Mel Brooks will do that. For people our age get this, but for younger people, there was obviously there was a comedy team named Laurel and Hardy back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. So
I had to explain that to my kids because I was laughing to it, and they go, "What are you talking about?" I go, and so then I delved down, and I think I Googled something, and I found Who's on First. Not that was that Laurel and Hardy?
No, that was Abbott and Costello.
Abbott and Costello. Right. That wasn't Laurel and Hardy. But anyway, so they then memorized who's on first from Abbott and Costello. So actually, Blazing Saddles led to Laurel and Hardy that did Abbott and Costello, and they know who's on first too, which is good.
That's good. Well, there's a couple jokes in here I wanted to point out just because they were referenced in other movies. There's one scene in this movie where Mel Brooks is talking with his bunch of like governors in his mansion, and they're all, just angry and shouting. They're all like, harumph, harumph, harumph. And Mel Brooks literally turns to someone and says, I didn't get a harumph out of that guy. And the guy's like, harumph, harumph. And it's just one of these things as a comedy writer, just when you're playing with language and stuff like that I love in movies. And they referenced that in a later movie. I did the Steve Martin movie, The Man with Two Brains, on Staff Picks a couple months ago. And
I think I saw that in the theater. I haven't seen that in forever.
Yeah, it's very hard to find. It's very obscure nowadays, but there's a scene in that where they reference this where they're murmuring. They're at a conference and someone has some great discovery about brains, and everyone in the audience goes murmur, murmur, murmur. And they point out, what are they saying? Oh, they're just murmuring. And it's literally just the harumph joke. So it's like a homage to Blazing Saddles.
For sure. That's a classic scene in both.
Yeah, and then the other one here is the scene that you mentioned earlier when the sheriff arrives in town. So many great jokes, and there's two in particular I wanted to talk about. You have the prospector up on the side of the town. He's got a telescope, and he's telling everyone, our new sheriff who has come here to save the town from the bandits is here. And he's literally shouting, the sheriff is an N-word, but... for
the bell rings.
Yeah, but the bell keeps ringing. So every time he says the N-word, the bell rings and it gets drowned out. And so they hear the sheriff is a nyeh, and they're like, oh, the sheriff must be near.
Hey, the sheriff is a near.
What did he say? The sheriff is near.
No, God blame it, dang blame. The sheriff is a near.
And so that's one of my favorite quotes, and I will say, for as liberal as Mel Brooks has thrown the N-word around, I love that one of the most prominent jokes in this movie is him showing restraint and not actually saying the word, you just think you're hearing the word.
Right. Well, the next line that I love on that whole scene is when Cleavon Little gets up on stage and everybody's mortified that he's black, and he says, excuse me while I whip this out, and he pulls out the bill, the proclamation that he's the sheriff of Rockridge. And all the women go, ah! And they all like faint when he says, excuse me while I whip this out. Oh my gosh, that is so funny.
Yeah, try explaining that joke to your kids when they're 6 and 7.
No, I don't know. I must have, because they laughed at it.
Okay, I have to just say something we're going to veer into bad taste here, but that joke, I've always loved that joke. The excuse me while I whip this out, he reaches down his pants, everyone freaks out. And that joke is so much funnier when you kind of realize the context of humor and just racial stereotypes at the time. And I I have to say this because I literally just read the book Black Like Me, which was, I forgot the guy who wrote it, but in the 60s it came out. You know that book, right?
Yeah, I do. I've not read it.
Okay, but he has a chapter in there where he's, this guy, he's a white writer, and he dyes his skin black, and he travels around the South. And he has a whole chapter in there about white hitchhikers would pick him up and talk to him. And he would just say, it was amazing to me how fascinated white people were with black people's genitals, black male genitals. He goes, it was like every single guy I talked to asked about it. It was the weirdest thing. And that's like what the big stereotype on white-black relations at the time is that all white people thought that black people were hugely endowed and very, very willing to whip it out and show you. So just when you read Black Like Me and then you go to this movie, which only came out like a couple years later, that joke is so much funnier when you realize what they're making fun of there. That's what the white people expect the black guy's going to do.
Right. Well, I like, it's almost the response or the way the women faint or are just outraged. It's just so funny. Then of course when everybody pulls out their guns. And the Reverend pulls out his Bible and says, put everything down. And then they shoot his Bible, and he says, son, you're on your own.
Again, yeah, that scene is my personal favorite in the movie. I love the first one with the hand cart. I just love all the interplay and just how they make the racist train people just look silly.
I like that the Camptown lady dancing is pretty strong on my book.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's kind of very meta there. Not only are the black guys the smarter people in the scene and the white guys are the idiots, they literally make the white the railroad people do it like a slave dance, and the slave song is the black guy stand there and just laugh at them.
Correct. No, it's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, people who have never seen this movie, the first 20 minutes, your mouth will be open in shock and your jaw will be dropped to the floor that they were allowed to do these jokes in a movie. But you just realize it's serving a much better point.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, so anyway, I'll just race through this movie. We meet Gene Wilder in there. He plays the Waco Kid, and there's a lot of...
And he tells him, hey, what do you like to do? Play chess, screw. Let's play chess then.
That's great. I love that. That's a wonderful Mel Brooks joke right there. Yeah, but there's a nice little buddy picture component in this with Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder. You get the white and the black guy. They get along right from the start because they're the two smartest guys in the movie. So again, it's just historic in that movies were not doing stuff like this at the time. So while it seems just like a silly, racy comedy, there's a lot of really interesting stuff Mel Brooks was doing in this movie that you may not notice until you pay attention or you look at it in historical context.
No, I know for sure. And it's too bad that those guys didn't team up for other movies. I think their chemistry was fantastic. Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little. In fact, Cleavon Little's a great actor. He ended up I think he was in Fletch 2 maybe. Every now and again I'll see a movie that he's in. I'm like, oh my God, there's Cleavon. Of course, he's died. He's died since I think in 10 years ago or so. But anyway, I guess Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder kind of had a buddy thing. But I tell you what, Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder, I loved them together.
Yeah. Do you know the history of Richard Pryor in this movie besides being a writer? Were you aware he was supposed to star in it?
I did. I knew that. But why did he not? Because it would have been too focused on him?
No, because the studio was very concerned with Richard Pryor. For people who don't know, Richard Pryor was the, edgiest comedian out there. He'd walk just like Mel Brooks, right up to that line of good taste, and he'd dance around it and try to make it funny.
Oh, yeah.
And they were very concerned about him, the studio. They thought he was too political, a little too offensive, and they were worried because I think he had a drug habit as well, and it was kind of well known.
Well, I don't know, and quite frankly, they needed that character to be endearing. And I don't know that Richard Pryor didn't have that kind of endearing quality about him that Cleavon Little totally did as an actor.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
So, I think while Richard Pryor, is a fantastic comedian, I think they hit it head on. I think they were spot on about not having him do it. If he in fact was going to, and apparently there was somebody else was going to be, I think, the Waco Kid.
Yeah, it was an older guy.
Yeah, and he was just drunk the whole time, literally drunk, and he showed up on the set, and they're like, we can't do this. And I think Mel Brooks called Gene and said, Gene, last second, can you come down and try to do this? And he was kind of like, I'll try, and they probably lucked into getting those two actors, and it made the movie perfect.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's really interesting from a comedy history perspective, how one thing begat another, how it leads to another, is that I read somewhere, he called in Gene Wilder as a favor to play the Waco Kid, and Gene Wilder's like, well, okay, I'll do it, but only if for your next movie you do this script that I've been working on, which was Young Frankenstein.
Yes.
So that's how that comes about. And then I think the dynamic between Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder was so strong that they wanted to recreate that, and they ended up with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, which I'm guessing is a callback to Blazing Saddles and with a more comedic bent, because obviously Cleavon Little, for people who don't know, was a Shakespeare actor. He was a stage guy.
He was a real actor.
Yeah.
Not that comedians aren't real actors, but he was a stage actor. Was it the first black-white buddy movie?
Well, there was In the Heat of the Night, the one with Sidney Poitier. I'm not sure. I haven't.
Yeah, but is that was a serious movie. It wasn't a comedy. It wasn't like a. I mean, even Lethal Weapon, is somewhat serious, but it's still a buddy comedy type movie. I swear, I think Blazing Saddles was the first kind of comedy buddy type movie, black and white.
It very well could be. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, and I don't know.
Because I thought about, In the Heat of the Night too with Sidney Poitier, but that was more of a series type gig than it was kind of a buddy, rom-com type deal.
Yeah. So Cleavon Little just never gets the credit that he deserves for really being a prominent member of kind of black actors being accepted as lead roles in Hollywood movies. Because I didn't even think about that if this was the first one where it was like a buddy movie.
I can't think of anything before then, but you can think of a lot that after. Of course, most of them with Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, Stir Crazy, and then Richard Pryor started carrying his own Brewster's Millions and just other movies. There weren't many black lead actors, until that point. So, I mean, he had blaxploitation movies with Shaft and stuff like that. But as far as, big time studios, Universal or Paramount or what have you, this was kind of the beginning of that.
Wow.
Which makes sense. I mean, Mel Brooks is smart like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't. Mel Brooks is doesn't see color at all, or doesn't see race or anything. I mean, everyone's equal, or everyone's fair game for his humor, which is actually equalizing.
Yeah. And that's, again, that review that I read earlier, that it was actually more integrated back then because people just accepted this is kind of the humor. And now it's much more self-conscious. People are more self-conscious about it in movies. But yeah, Mel Brooks would just go for it.
Well, no, then it's more deep down. This movie is way more derogatory to white people than any race.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because the white people are the idiots. And they're total idiots. But unfortunately, we know people that are just like all the people in this movie.
Well, yeah, the Waco Kid. There's a really ballsy line in here that I kind of forgot about it until I watched it this afternoon, where Gene Wilder even says it to Cleavon Little. He's like, these people in the town, they don't know any better. They're not going to accept you right away. Remember, these are just the common clay of the U.S. Morons.
You're right. I forget that.
Yeah, so Mel Brooks is taking a not veiled dig at most of America right there.
For sure. And when Cleavon gets himself out of the trouble by pulling the gun on himself, and nobody move her, he's going to get it. And he comes in his room and he goes, I am so good. And they are so stupid.
Yeah. And again, you can see why, black kids growing up watching this movie would love it so much, because there's no other movie that would have shown the black hero being the smart guy outwitting all these idiot white guys. That's, unless you're going to the blaxploitation movies, that just wasn't something you were going to see a lot in these mainstream comedies.
No, who else would bring a telegram for Mongo?
Yes. He invented the candygram, and he didn't even get credit for it, those bastards.
No, for sure.
Okay, just racing through the end of the movie, we got what's her face? I always forget her name.
Madeline Kahn.
Madeline Kahn, big name in this movie. This is the movie that kind of shot her to big success as a comedian. She did pretty much every Mel Brooks movie after this. I love her in The History of the World, especially as Empress Nympho. But this is the one. Yeah, this is the one she's most known for. Although I will say I have a hard time watching this movie at home because my wife hates Madeline Kahn.
Really?
She just cannot stand that voice. So I don't know.
She's got a loud voice, but she can sing.
Yeah, she's good. Yeah.
No, yes. No, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He is a eunuch. He is dead.
Yeah, we'll get to The History of the World because that's.
I know, I dig her.
But yeah, so Madeline Kahn again shot to success because of this, and I read somewhere that some reviews of this movie, I think even contemporary ones when it came out, were saying Madeline Kahn was kind of this undiscovered star, and Mel Brooks just gives her this amazing dialogue and great characterizations, and they're like, no one was ever better to comedians than Mel Brooks. He absolutely just wrote stuff right in her wheelhouse, and she made a big career out of this. So it's so many careers kind of came out of this movie, I would say.
No, for sure. I love her line. Cowboy, what's your name? Tex, ma'am. Tex, ma'am.
Who else do we have in here? We have Alex Karras, a former fellow NFL player. Have you ever met Alex Karras?
No, and he's dead now. I never had met him. God, it reminds me. I think I have a shirt that I got a long time ago that says, "Baby, please, I am not from Havana." When she wants the Schmorgenschnagen another time.
Now, I was gonna say Alex Karras was also in Webster, a totally different role.
Yes, he was. No, he played for the Chargers, I believe, and so a lot of those, like Freddie Dreyer, played for the Rams and ended up being Hunter. And so back in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of NFL ball players. I think Rosie Greer ended up going into acting, and he played for the Rams as well. But team players who played for the Chargers and that Southern California area kind of merged into the Hollywood a little bit, and that's what he was also. Alex Karras was also in Against All Odds.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Did you know that movie with Jeff Bridges?
Yeah, I do know the movie. I forgot he was in that.
Oh yeah, he actually goes in the cave and tries to get him out, and I think they kill him in the cave. He's the coach. Was it that Rachel Ward? Isn't she the girl in that movie?
I just did a movie about her, or starring her on Staff Picks called Fortress last week.
Listen, Rachel Ward was so hot in Against All Odds. You need to re-see that one. I'm telling you. And Jeff Bridges is great looking. I mean, he's young and lean. He plays a receiver with a bum knee. And you got what's the actor Woods?
James Woods.
James Woods is like the heavy. He's like the owner or the president of the team. And oh man, it's great. It's a really good movie. But anyway, Alex Karras is in that movie as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking of former NFL players that made movies, and I remember John Matuzak, of course, with the Raiders. So yeah, it backs up all these California guys.
Matuzak was in the Goonies.
Yes, and also the classic Caveman with Ringo Starr.
And Barbara Bach.
Yes, and Shelley Long. It's quite a cast.
Yeah, I think didn't Ringo marry Barbara Bach?
Yes, he did.
Yes. Peace and love.
Way to go, Ringo.
Yeah, for sure. He's a Beatle. Can't blame him or her.
I think they're still married too. That's like an incredibly long marriage.
It really is. Especially since he's like 106.
Okay, so again, I'll kind of leave out the details for the end of this movie because we're kind of wrapping up the podcast here. But yeah, the good guy, Black Bart, saves the day. All the town begrudgingly accepts him. He outsmarts the bad guys. Although I have to mention before we finish it off the scene with the Klansmen, the Ku Klux Klansmen. Yes,
that's a good one too.
Why don't you paint the picture for people who have never seen this movie or haven't seen it in a while?
Well, so all the to run the townspeople out, they got to get a posse together, and so they got they trying to get all the worst people in the area and the world, and so they've got a lineup that they're taking their names to see if they're worthy of becoming part of the posse that's going to run people out of Rockridge. And you've got bikers, you've got the Mexicans, typical Mexican gang people. You've got Nazis, which obviously aren't in existence at that point. You got the Ku Klux Klan, which is not in existence at that point. And so they Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder are trying to infiltrate this group. So they see the Klans guys, and Gene Wilder holds up Cleavon and says, hey boys, look what I got here. And Cleavon Little says, where are all the white women at? And so the two Klansmen come running over, and then they, of course, go behind a rock, and you hear, and then all of a sudden, the two Klans people come back out, and they're all obviously hooded, and Cleavon and Gene Wilder have beat up the two Klansmen, and they've taken their spot. Of course, when they get to the front of the line, Slim Pickens is kind of questioning Cleavon Little's dirty hands. And he's going, wait a minute, that doesn't add up. And then Cleavon Little turns his hand over and says, oh, no, it comes right off. Look, see the palms of my hand? And it's pretty fun. My kids always love saying one of the bad guys in there says, all right, what are you saying? He goes, rape, arson, murder, and rape. He goes, you said rape twice. He goes, that's my favorite. And one guy has gum in line. He goes, do you have a piece of gum for everybody in line? And he says, no, I didn't know there were going to be this many. Boom, shoots him and kills him.
Yeah. And there's a great line there where Black Bart has been exposed as a fake Klansman, and they're all going to kill him.
Jesse Owens.
Yeah, and now my next impression, Jesse Owens. He runs away.
No, and then so they get away, and they've got to figure out they're gonna not to throw away the plot of the movie, but they've got to trick the Raiders from going into a fake town. But they need time. And so they come up with a plan. The only way to get more time to keep the Raiders from coming into the real Rock Ridge while they build the fake Rock Ridge, they come up with the plan with the toll booth. And that is another famous line where Slim Pickens comes up and he sees there's a toll booth. Of course, the toll booth is in the middle of the desert, and any person with half a brain or 1/10 of a brain would say, okay, I'm going to walk around the toll booth. But of course, they will go up to the toll booth and go, how much? And it says a dime, and Slim Pickens turns around and says, dimes? Somebody's got to go back and get a load of dimes. And so they wait in line, but it slows them all down enough for Rock Ridge to build a new fake Rock Ridge.
Yeah, and again, just this crazy ending, a big fight, everyone fights and brawls, and the movie literally, they spill out of the set into like a stage of a sound studio in Hollywood. It's just this crazy ending that you kind of have to see to believe. You kind of won me over when you talked about it, Brad. Now that I think about it, I actually kind of like the ending a little more.
I do too. And you know what? Quite frankly, when I first saw it, I didn't know that I understood it. It was silly, and I got it. But as I've watched it as a mature adult, I kind of I was like, wait a minute, this is perfect because it's just so absurd, but yet it still makes fun of certain things with Universal and people watching and gawking and I don't know, it's perfect. And then of course at the very end they have to go to a movie theater to see how the movie ends, but of course because it's in the movies, right?
Yeah. And Mel Brooks used that joke again in Spaceballs, where he literally watches the movie on video to see how the movie's going to go. He kind of recycles his own joke here.
He does that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, and then of course in the very end they end up riding off into the sunset.
Although they get in a limo.
No, they start out on horses, and it's kind of emotional. They got some good music playing, and then they're clearly in like Monument Valley or somewhere, and then so they ride their horses off, and you think they're going to ride off into the sunset, and then all of a sudden a limo comes. They get off their horses, and they get in the limo, and they take off into the sunset in the limo, which is apropos of nothing but everything.
Okay, two things to wrap up this discussion of Blazing Saddles here. The first one, do you know which movie shared a filming location with this one? There's two movies from almost the same era that were filmed on the exact same set. Do you know the other one?
Okay. And would they be Westerns?
It would be a Western, yes. Mostly a Western.
And it was filmed around the same time?
Yes.
It wouldn't have been any Clint Eastwood movie.
No. Think more science fiction.
God, one of the Silverado is not old enough to be there.
I will give you a hint. They recently remade this as a TV series.
As a TV series?
Well, it's like an internet series. I'll give you the answer. Westworld.
Ah, that makes sense, and I love me some Westworld, too.
Yeah, they filmed Westworld and Blazing Saddles on the exact same set, so when you look at Rock Ridge, that's the same set.
You know what? That's funny you say that. I have not seen the original Westworld.
Wow.
I should have known that. Now I've seen every single episode, and I get online and I read all the stuff about Westworld, the new one. But I've seen snippets of Westworld with Yul Brynner. I've not seen the whole thing, but as I'm thinking about the snippets I've seen of it, you're absolutely right. That is Rock Ridge. And you're saying there's another movie that's out there?
Well, I was saying Westworld. That's one thing I wanted to say. But the other thing is that about the theme song for this movie, one of my favorite bits of trivia about Blazing Saddles, is that they wrote Blazing Saddles. Mel Brooks always does the songs.
They wrote a blazing saddle. I mean, I haven't heard that song in a long time, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a great song, but they gave it to this famous Western singer, Frankie Lane, and he sang the hell out of that song. Like, he puts all this emotion and spirit in it, and Mel Brooks is like, later, he's like, I didn't have the heart to tell him it was a comedy. So the guy had no idea he was singing for a comedy, and that's why the song is so majestic and grand, and that's why just Mel Brooks liked it more that way. He's like, yeah, I just didn't have the heart to tell him it's a silly little comedy movie.
And it's, quite frankly, that almost makes the movie, because it opens up with the majestic music, and there are times, when of course when Bart's coming across the desert and Count Basie's kind of playing the music, that it's kind of like, I don't want to, it's obviously not John Williams, but Star Wars and Rocky and movies are made, Chariots of Fire, movies are made because of soundtracks. I mean, it's just a good movie with a great soundtrack makes it that movie that much better. And I'm telling you, this movie would not be as good if it had a hokey, I mean, the words are kind of funny, but it's a real theme song to like a real Western. And that's what makes it ironic or sardonic or whatever it is. That's what makes it work, because it seems so serious, yet the movie is so silly.
Well, yeah, and Mel Brooks has always just been an underrated songwriter. I don't know if people realize how many songs he puts in his movies over the years. I mean, yeah, he became a Broadway producer later, but he had years of writing these movies. Like, you think back to Springtime for Hitler. That's a great song, too. I mean, that's a full-on Broadway song he was writing back in the 60s. And then we go to the History of the World, which obviously has the Spanish Inquisition song, which we'll get to on the next show. Yeah, but so
Sure.
he's very underrated as a songwriter, much as I always say Trey Parker is from South Park. He writes fantastic songs, and people I don't think, realize how good his stuff is.
Well, that and then old boy, Family Guy, McFarlane.
Oh, McFarlane, yeah, he's great.
Oh, he's an unbelievable musician. He sings, opera music. He's one of the best opera singers around. He's unbelievable.
Wow. Well, so I think we've pretty much covered Blazing Saddles, and again, most of my listeners, I'm sure, are aware of this movie, but I'm hoping we gave you reasons to appreciate it even on a different level. Some of the stuff we've talked about, just, the first black and white buddy movie, just one of the very first Hollywood movies with a black lead, like the hero is the comic guy, he's like the smartest one in the room. Just so many things going on here beyond just a silly, racial comedy. It's one of these movies that really, I think, should get more respect than it really does, because people, again, just remember, oh, it's the comedy with all the N-words and the fart scenes.
Right. No, and I, quite frankly, Mario, when we met, the fact that you appreciated that movie spoke a lot about who you are. And it's whenever I meet somebody and we can coordinate on book likes or music likes or movie likes, it kind of speaks volumes. Somebody's like, they get it. Because if somebody didn't get that, I don't know that we would be buddies.
Yeah, it would be superficial friendship.
For sure.
Yeah, again, I met Brad, and it was like we knew each other all along, which was kind of shocking, because there aren't very many people that I know in the world that I kind of meet right away, and we start talking about movies on a very deep comedic level. So it was really cool. And again, like you've been in the NFL, I'm just some programmer in California. We have no, our back histories are not the same, but it's just neat that we had this thing to talk about. And there was even another one, is that my dad was a personal injury lawyer, and I was raised in his office. And I know all this stuff about personal injury because that was my world. And like my dad, to this day, I know if I get rear-ended in a car accident, don't ever say I have no injuries. Like, my dad trained me well.
No, for sure. Always grab your neck.
Yeah. So I'm saying, as a person, and Brad is a personal injury lawyer himself, so we had this connection as well. Although, just from you as a personal injury lawyer yourself, there's a scene in this movie where there's a guy on a horse, and Alex Karras walks up, punches the horse, and the stuntman falls to the left underneath the horse. The horse and the guy goes down. As a personal injury lawyer, you must cringe when you watch that scene. Someone had to get hurt in that scene.
Well, actually, as an animal lover, I cringe when I watch that scene more, though. But I know he didn't hit the horse. But that's quite a famous scene, too. I forgot about that one. You can't park your steer here.
Yeah.
Because he's coming in with a huge bull. That's his mode of transportation. And he knocks out the horse in order to get a spot.
Yeah, and it's the stuntman who really takes the hit when you watch it. He gets trapped under the horse.
I don't think I noticed that before. I'm always watching Alex Karras or Mongo. By the way, Steve McMichael, great defensive lineman for Chicago Bears, was defensive. His nickname was Mongo, and I swear he was a friend of mine. We played the same position, and he was a little older than me, but he was kind of one of my idols, in football. Big guy from Texas. And but anyway, he was Mongo on the 85 Bears, and he got his nickname from that.
Now, do you know who wrote most of the Mongo dialogue and characters in this movie?
Well, specifically, I wouldn't know.
I will let you know. It's Richard Pryor.
No, I was going to say, I think Richard Pryor did a lot of things, but that would have been my guess if you'd given me multiple choice.
Yeah. I was just reading that the other day, that they brought Richard Pryor on as a script consultant, and he wrote a bunch of jokes, and they thought that he would help with a lot of the racial jokes, but he didn't really want to touch those because those were already strong in the script, so he mostly just did Mongo. So almost everything you see regarding Mongo is Richard Pryor's contribution.
Well, kudos to all of them.
Yeah. So anyway, anything else you want to add before we sign off here? Any final Blazing Saddles thoughts before we move on to the next episode and we start thinking about history of the world?
No, just if you watch Blazing Saddles for the first time, understand it's stronger than you think it is. Don't watch it on a superficial level. Watch it and appreciate it and understand the writers, understand, the motivation behind why somebody would make these jokes and make this movie like this, because that's why it works so well.
Yeah, and especially think about it in the context of when it was made. I mean, this is an early 70s movie. It's pushing some barriers here that you're not going to see from that time period. So it's really, really ballsy, even more ballsy than you think it is.
No, it is, and unfortunately, in 1974 was a lot closer to segregation than we are now, which makes it that much more poignant then, because I think it made you understand how stupid people's opinions and separate but equal and all these things that had just been eliminated before then. It really stuck a fork in somebody's thought process, saying, how could you think that separate would be equal? That's kind of what this is all about, and it pokes fun at the people who would actually think that.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you really want to make fun of something or really want to take down an idea or just a concept, you mock it. You make fun of it and you just make it comedic. And so that's why you'll still to this day see the argument, oh, you can't show Blazing Saddles on TV. You just can't show that. I'm like, why not? Like,
yeah, you hit the nail round the head when you said mocking something by making it funny is actually defeating it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, so again, that's one of the reasons I love this movie, and again, I'm so excited we got to do it. And again, this isn't really necessarily a movie that's unknown. Like, I've done some really obscure movies on the show that, like, me and my co-host were the only two people I think who have ever seen this movie. So this one's at the other end of the spectrum, but I think this is a fun episode, and I hope people liked hearing us talk about it, because again, we're recreating literally the conversation that Brad and I had at dinner or at lunch in Tampa that one day. So it's more natural on a podcast than it is in a restaurant with people around.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, Brad, I just want to thank you for stopping by. I know in the future we'll be doing History of the World Part 1. I really hope people enjoyed this episode. This is a little different style, a little different format than I've done, but again, just one of these I was really looking forward to, and Brad, just so excited that you had the time to stop by.
Mario, I appreciate you having me. I look forward to the next one. I hope I didn't let you down with this one.
No, you did great. Thank you very much. As they say, thank you, Brad Culpepper.
Right.
Okay, and again, my name is Mario Lanza. This is Staff Picks. You can reach me, staffpickspodcast@gmail.com. You can reach me on Twitter @MarioJLanza. And until the next time I talk to you, I will be out there looking for more underrated or underloved movies, and I'll try to find somebody interesting to come on and talk about them. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Hey, where are the white women at?